matrix. Is this own? Yeah, so injury pain matrix. So super important. There's going to be people with pre-existing injuries. There's going to be people that develop injuries. And a lot of times it may be completely out of our control. We're with people 1 to 4 hours a week. They do other stuff. So we're competing with a lot of stuff. People, they're just going to have issues, right? So there's 3 common issues or injuries. It's the back, it's the shoulder, and it's the knee. Super important. Always think like a lawyer. Always. There's acts of commission and there's acts of omission. So very important. I think of things of like red flag, green flag, right? So anytime somebody has an issue, right off the bat, we got to stop doing something, okay? And these things are based off like my 14 years of coaching, science, architecture of what's going on, right? So first things first, if somebody has a back issue, stop any offending exercise, okay? And we're also going to stop any jumping or high impact. We're also going to stop any core movement or low back flexibility, any medicine ball slams, anything of that nature. I'm actually going to start breaking this down, and I'm going to explain the thought process of each one. First of all, we got to address like biases and blind spots. So a cognitive bias is basically a blind spot. It's a way of thinking that you're not exposed to, and it's super important. So there's like short-term biases. So I'll give you an example. You'll tell somebody to stop doing something and their cognitive biases, but I'm able to do it and I want to do it. Okay. So they're making a decision based on their ability, not what's best for them. Does that make sense? It's like, I can spend this money. I'm like, yeah, but it's going to fuck up your credit. Do we want to do that? Okay. So very important, because a lot of times with the back, somebody will say, hey, you know what, but when I stretch my low back, it feels better. Why are you telling me to stop? It's a cognitive bias. Just like it feels good to scratch a scab, it feels good to scratch a scab, right? But then you open the wound up and you increase the possibility of a bacterial infection. So that's a cognitive bias. It conflicts with the architecture of the low back. So when somebody says that, one of the things I say is like, I know it feels good, but here's why it feels good. Here's the analogy: scratching the scab. I mean, doing drugs feels good, but it's not, right? Immediately, it's not good for you. Credit card charges are good, but it might screw up your credit. And so I make them aware of this cognitive bias, and I also make them aware of why it's feeling good. If they stretch their low back and they have back pain and it feels good, it's because they're feeling it through the stretch reflex cycle. Meaning, if you stretch a muscle, you get an immediate feeling of relaxation, but it's actually going against the architecture of the low back. It's the scratching the scab analogy, okay? So always be aware of yours and other people's cognitive biases and blind spots, okay? And that one cognitive bias is the immediate feeling they're having versus what long-term is beneficial for them. The other bias is, but I can do it. Doesn't mean you should, okay? So anything that's a core movement, anything the core is moving, you stop right away, okay? Anything where you're increasing a low back flexibility. Who has the highest incidence of back injuries? Gymnasts and dancers. Who has the most flexible backs? Gymnasts and dancers. And if you know the architecture of the low back, it's designed for like 13 degrees of rotation, which is nothing, okay? So stop. And then medicine ball slams, we got to stop that. And the reason for that is when the back has pain, the shock absorbers are malfunctioning, meaning it cannot absorb force, right? And if you can't absorb force, the pain's going to come, okay? So when you're throwing medicine ball, there's a tremendous amount of velocity going through your core. So you got to stop that. And again, the cognitive bias you're going to get from most members, but I can do it. Why are you telling me to stop? I'm like, I am the friendly designated driver in the bar that says, hey, Noah, I know you can have your 8th shot of tequila, but last time you had 7 shots, you were hungover and I had to take care of you. And then it's like, oh, I'm like, this is your tequila shot, okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. So are you clear as far as what constitutes core movement and back flexibility?
Yes.
Okay. And again, medicine ball slams, too much velocity going through the.
So would that be also kind of like, so jumping on the box, like throwing against the wall with a medicine ball, anything of that hip and kind of core movement?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's basically, think about it, if there's pain, you're not able to absorb force in a way that is beneficial. Gotcha. So if your shock absorbers are malfunction, think about a fighter who is chinny. The slightest punch knocks him or her out. Stop getting punched, right? If your chin hurts, if you get knocked out, stop fighting, right? So things of that nature. And then super important, we need to assess the situation. So first things first, you have them point. It's like, all right, point to the area. Where is it? Okay, it's this area. It's going to give clues. And then please tell me, like, is this pre-existing? When did it start? I ask questions. What time during the day does it bother you? Is there certain movements or postures that aggravate it? And then I ask them, is it dull, sharp, or achy? This is going to give clues, okay? And then, is it flexion, extension, or rotation? Super important. Again, you're going to hear me. Great coaches are aware of biases. Great coaches are aware of blind spots. Okay, so you should never trust a person's advice about injuries. You should trust the experience of like many people and many. So, for example, here's a cognitive bias. You're at a gathering and you say, my back hurts, and your well-intentioned, well-meaning friend says, oh, I had back pain. I know exactly how you should do. You should do this exercise and stretch this, and you'll be good to go. He or she is well-intentioned, but think about how crazy that is. It's like having a condition and saying, oh, you should take this exact medicine, this exact same dose at the exact same frequency. That's what we call negligent, okay?
Because everybody's different in every way possible, so this stretch might work for you, but it also might, for this person, might cause even more pain.
Right, and it's a cognitive bias, so problem plus solution, okay? So super important, we got to figure out, so flexion is basically when you're bringing things together. Like I'm flexing here, I'm flexing my spine. You're bringing stuff together. Extension is kind of like, you're extending your back, right? Flexion is here, okay? Rotation is here. And why your well-intentioned friend is, you should not trust them, is because they have a cognitive bias, right? They're only looking at their situation, okay? So there's problem and solution. If you have a problem, you should have the appropriate solution.
Yes.
Right? So I'll give an example. If your well-intentioned friend says, hey, what if they had a flexion issue? So anytime their back flexes, that's their injury mechanism, right? And so they solved it with like, getting stronger in extension. So there's the opposite. Or they have a stability issue, right? And they solved it, so they had a lack of stability. And so they solved it by increasing stability. Or they had a mobility issue, and they solved it by giving you mobility. Okay. So what if your issue, the reason you have back pain, is because you are moving too much, meaning you have too much low back flexibility. You're going past your range of motion. And if they had an issue where they have no mobility in their upper back or their hips, so they're giving you the wrong solution. So again, if you have a mobility problem, right? And then they give you a stability solution, it's putting square pegs in round holes, right? Some people in here, they have back issues because they can't extend their hips and their glutes are malfunctioning. right?
Yeah.
Some people have issues because they can't prevent rotation,
Okay.
right? So I ask myself, are you flexion intolerant, extension intolerant, rotation intolerant? Right? Because if somebody is rotation intolerant, meaning that's their injury mechanism, and you tell them to increase their flexibility,
You're doing harm.
guilty. So in a court of law, they'll say, okay, so this person had rotation intolerant. That's their injury mechanism, and you prescribe them more rotation and back flexibility, guilty. That's called an act of commission. Okay, so super important. Be aware of people's cognitive biases. You got to fit the solution with the problem. So we got to figure out, is this a flexion problem, an extension problem, a rotation problem, a stability problem, a mobility problem? We're going to break that down later. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we got to record this. Super important to be professional, not get sued. We got to record this on their fitness program and on the coach shift report, and even more, texting everybody. Okay? Because again, a court of law. So you knew this issue, but you didn't communicate. Guilty, right? I always think like a lawyer. And then the inverse is we got to start doing certain things. On the back, the core is designed for stability. It's designed to transfer force generated through the ground and upper extremities. It's not designed to move. Anybody who says otherwise is only using their one reference experience versus 14 years. I mean, it's actually not even a debatable issue. That's the architecture of the low back, okay? So you got to start increasing stability. That's like holding. What's actually beneficial to the core is not strength, believe it or not. It's actually endurance. It's actually being able to hold position.
For a long period of time.
Right? It depends for everybody, but it's like you should be able to hold a position. And again, if you look at the evidence, it's not even a debatable issue, right? And so we got to increase core stability. It's basically someone's ability to maintain a stable core under changing conditions, okay? And then rolling out the hip flexors. So it's basically, if this is tight, it's going to shut off other things above or below, right? So if the co-pilot is not doing his or her job, the pilot gets stressed out. The pilot is not doing his or her job, the co-pilot gets stressed out, and then the plane loses altitude, okay? All right, so hip flexors or anything in the front, right? I'm flexing my hip. Also referred to as the quads, so on and forth, but no, this is the hip flexors, okay? And then we're going to double up on hip extension. So super important, like a squat is a knee movement, and a deadlift or a bridge is a hip movement. They look similar, but they're different. So we're going to double up on stuff where the core is stable as hell, and you're doing like extending your legs. Okay? And that's probably because a lot of times when there's back pain, the glutes are just malfunctioning. Their timing's off, okay? Another thing is a lot of people have back pain because their hips don't move enough, and so the back moves more than it should.
Because it's trying to compensate.
It's trying to compensate. 99% of the time, if I see someone who had back pain, they lack the ability to hold the back in place.
Okay.
They don't have control over it. They don't have that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so we're going to work the glutes, all that good stuff. So that's the back stuff. Any like further questions on the back in any area?
So when someone points to a position on their back,